What is the greenest free energy design that I can conceive of? Well, why reinvent the wheel? Let's go ahead and build a structure, and this structure, let's go ahead and put waves of rings around the structure so that it has a sweeping pattern. Now, what is this going to do? Well, not much until you look at the fact that wind is going to be blowing back and forth every day, and you're going to get ambient amounts of brush discharge static electricity. The way that we're going to design this is we're going to put a nice big barrier step about 1/5 of the way up the structure. And on our structure, we're going to call that 35th level, if we're mimicking the structure that's located in Giza. We're going to lob the top off the top of the structure so that basically over time, this is going to become a large Van de Graaff generator. Now, that's not going to do too much. You can't really do a whole lot except for if we climbed up on there, filled a Leyden jar, brought it down, shorted it to a larger capacitor, climbed up there, filled a Leyden jar, brought it down, shorted it to another capacitor. What if we let nature do a lot of the work? That's one of the best things about the Giza Pyramid. What we're going to do, might as well draw it from the bottom up. At ground level, we're going to construct a room. We're going to go ahead, modeling the structure over in Giza. We're going to build this room to be the cathode if we're going to be doing electrolysis. We're going to go ahead and, as we're building it, make sure that this whole structure down here is in a big limestone bath or something that's basically a non-conductive material. We're going to go ahead out of our thing, and eventually we'll do it out of nature, but for right now, since we don't want to include the other structures on the plateau, we're going to go ahead and build a cathode there, and we're going to put our anode being the pit within the subterranean chamber. And just because we're going to be green, for right now, let's just use a couple of solar panels to go ahead and break these two respective gases. The hydrogen, we're going to pump up and bring it into the top of the, what they like to call the King's chamber. I like to call it the combustion chamber. You'll see why in a few minutes. We're going to bring that gas up into the top of there to allow it to get in equilibrium and push itself down and bring it in through below the floor of the chamber through a hole that's in the northwest corner. And we're going to fill that with water. That's going to be our flashback arrestor. The gas is going to come up into the room, no big deal. Now, since we have an abundance of static electricity, we're going to design this room to be as perfectly symmetry as possible, with the exception of on the south wall. We're going to build a nice square that comes out to a point. It's going to, from the side, recess in, and this point is going to come out, so if we were to look at the wall, it's right outside of the wall. And this is going to be where, because of the symmetry of the room and the abundance of static electricity, we're going to have a spark. Well, we would if we had a conduit to bring that static electricity down into the structure, and we do. That would be the conduit that comes off of the north of the structure. Now, I didn't really draw that right because it comes out level for a while and then turns up, and that comes more relevant when we get into building other pieces of it here. But that's going to allow that static electricity to venture down into the system and create that spark. Now, that spark, the way it's positioned right there, is also the opening to the conduit that comes out of this side. And that conduit, the way that it's shaped, I guess I should draw it from here, comes down into here, like so. The break in the rock is right there. Now, that break in the rock is going to be relevant because that's going to be one of our water levels. It's going to come down into the system, right there. The conduit on the other side, on the north side, is actually just below that break in the rock. And the conduit that's actually in the wall here that we're going to get to is actually just above that break in the rock. What we're going to allow is, when this oxygen and hydrogen burn together, create a pool of water. That pool of water is also going to have moisture and steam and other stuff. That steam is going to be condensating and creating a conduit, both the steam itself and the water itself, to pull that static electricity more efficiently down into the system. Now, as it comes down into the system, didn't really get into it yet, but there's a pre-chamber room there. Now, the water level within this room is going to be maintained so that it is at this level, and the opening in the back of here will be so that when the water rises, it will choke off the inlet of the gases, and as the water recedes, it will allow more gases in. That is going to be your flow control and regulator for that particular room. That makes it so that that reaction there is not sporadic, but is actually maintained, kind of like your water heater and your heater for your house. It starts with a but then it comes to a dull roar, and this will maintain it at a dull roar. We're going to replace one wall there that goes down to, that's about 1/3 of the way into the room, and we're going to suspend a little trough above the room at an elevation, so the lowest point of it comes down to this elevation again. Anybody who's familiar with that room knows of the boss mark. We're going to put that boss mark right there. And that trough is going to allow for the water to condense and and fill that and drip over and down into the system, as well as the water coming down here is going to fall and drip down into the area they like to call the thieves tunnel that has the conduit above it right there. That is going to allow the hot steam or charged steam to come down into the room and into the system, as well as some water from this side of the system, which will just drip over and flow down as well. Now, exactly how they interact, we're going to have to get a little bit of nature involved there and see what nature does. But I do believe that the way this is constructed, every now and then you're going to get a reaction like you do in a Lord Kelvin drip generator, Lord Kelvin water drop electrostatic generator, and we're going to get a spark. And that spark, just like the spark in here, is going to ignite the gases together, which is going to be like a little pump to push the atmosphere, whatever's in the the gases and stuff, down into the system. Now, we're also going to get condensation, the ribbing on the wall and stuff like that already exists is going to help with condensation, and all of this condensation is going to aid in bringing this static electricity down into the system. Now, as the static electricity comes down to the system, both in the water vapor and the driplets dropping down and the conduit of water that's actually being manufactured because of this whole thing, like starting a river up there, it's going to pull it down and pool within the level that they like to call the Queen's Chamber. Now, this is going to also allow for condensation within the system. And as condensation, the opposite of steam, is going to cause a negative pressure, which is going to be causing a vacuum, which is going to be pulling the steam into this room, as well as the condensation and everything. Eventually, you're going to get so much steam and so little surface area that that electricity is going to want to go somewhere, and that somewhere that it wants to go is actually the crack that we see in the southern wall, that in the 1800s, we went ahead and drilled through the crack to find the conduit behind it, which is the conduit that the electricity would be arcing to. Of course, we didn't recognize that as electrical arc because we had no idea what electricity was. We still had the Baghdad batteries sitting in there in the museums, and we're calling them fancy vases. As the water reached its fill level there, it would actually spill down into what they like to call the grotto, and then from there would connect with the waters that would go down into the subterranean chamber area. This is why some of this is here. And we got the pit in here, the hallway that goes to there, and the pre-subterranean chamber, and the dead end shaft. So, what would all this do? Well, this get up here would allow for the oxygen, the other side of the system, to bubble out through the system. And one thing that you may not notice is where this conduit comes to join, it is a funky shape like that, which would allow the oxygen to pool on top, because there's a little tooth there, and nice and smooth, to pool on top and bubble out. And when it bubbled out, it would create a water hammer effect. That water hammer effect, you can see the evidence of in pictures of the 1800s, where there's a pile of dirt, which will show you the frequency and wavelength of that particular water hammer. and that water hammer pressure would echo through the system and down into what they like to call the dead end shaft, which is not nice and perfectly square, although it is pretty dang straight, but is more shaped like a caterpillar, which will either allow for cavitation or high pressure zones, depending on exactly what's going on. Now, there's a whole lot more to this area, but you can look at that at my subterranean videos or the system down under videos, because it gets pretty complicated. There's also a separation of gases within there, because I believe there's some hydrogen overflow or off venting that happens off of a location right about there, and you can see how the two gases are separated, something which they knew the knowledge that hydrogen separated in its two respective gases, and it was relatively easy to do with nature. Like I said, we were doing it with like a solar panel here, but they were actually utilizing the other structure next to it and the conduits underneath it and running a water of a slightly different voltage potential, and that would be their organic way to separate this into its respective gases. I think it would be cool if we tried to do something where we put a Lord Kelvin water drop generator and tried to get the voltage potential there to separate the water into its two potential gases, hence not needing, anything that would be referred to as electricity, continuing to support how static electricity could be used as the energy source, something which we kind of almost ignore today. But anyway, that would be my free energy solution. Grabbing the static electricity, ambient static electricity from outside of the structure, pulling it down into the structure and tapping it off, utilizing water and nature to do this. I'd say it's fairly dangerous because we are playing with hydrogen, but they used a very large structure inside of a very big rock building, so the potential for danger was not there. And as many people, including John Cadman, have promoted, that there have been explosions in the King's Chamber. This also documents that. It also documents why there's scarring. It looks like heat damage on the top of the Grand Gallery there, and why then it looks like there's a watermark about a third of the way and up the length of the hallway there. So all this is oh, did I mention as this air would be trying to bubble out, the oxygen would try to bubble out, going through the rocks here, it's also creating an air gap there, separating the system within from the system without. It was a very well thought out and engineered system, including the three rings they have on here are working like little Faraday rings like you'd put around your electrical wire to keep from having staticky noise. Anyway, there you go. There's my system. Have a nice day. Wash, rinse, repeat.